Thank you for joining us today for the Hyperledger member webinar and our in-depth with Thales, increasing cybersecurity for Hyperledger Fabric. Very excited about our session today. Just give us 1 minute and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can walk everybody through some housekeeping. Okay. Igor, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Hyperledger In-depth hour with Hyperledger member Thales on increasing cybersecurity for Hyperledger Fabric. Today we have two distinguished speakers. We have Blair Canavan, who's the Director of Alliances and Digital Identity and Security at Thales, and Avesta Hojati, who is the Head of R&D at DigiCert, a partner of Thales. Today's session is our ongoing Hyperledger member community sessions to help us share and let the community know how Hyperledger technology is being used in production use cases and other innovative ways. So a couple of housekeeping activities. Just a reminder that the session is being recorded, and we also have to follow our antitrust policy. All Linux Foundation meetings, presentations, webinars that involve industry competitors has to follow the antitrust. If there's any question about what you should share or not share, please do raise your hand and one of the staff members will assist you. Once again, this is also being live streamed, so say hello to the live stream audience that is joining us, and the recording will be made available after the session. So we look forward to you also sharing that information with others in your organization. The slides will also be available for download after the session via our Hyperledger library, member webinar library, where you can find the video recording and the sessions as well. So a couple of other things. We want to make sure that all the participants here on the webinar get the most out of the session. So if you have a question, there's multiple ways that you can communicate with the speakers. Number one is using the raise hand feature in Zoom, and we can go ahead at the appropriate time and open up the audio for questions directly to the speakers today. We also will enable the ask questions box. So if you're shy and you just want to do a text box Q&A, go ahead and enter the questions, and myself along with the panelists will be reviewing and getting to those questions when the time permits. Last but not least, please go ahead and talk and comment in the chat room. Be respectful and follow our standard guidelines, community guidelines, but please, introduce yourself, let us know who is here, and perhaps an interesting fact about yourselves, for example, what location you're dialing in from today. So once again, I want to thank our speakers. We have Blair Canavan, who's the Director of Alliances at Digital Identity and Security at Thales, and also Avesta Hojati, Head of R&D at DigiCert. So Blair, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time today to talk about what Thales has been doing. You have been a member of the Hyperledger community for many years and also have had leaders within our technical open source communities in the past. So we are looking forward to the session.
Thank you very much, Daniela. I'm just going to ask Avesta to come on as well there so we can have a look at his handsome face. He's a lot younger than me, but boy, has he done a whole lot in his much shorter career than I have. But very glad to have you on board there, Avesta. Are you there?
I am, Blair. Sorry, actually, I was describing before you joined. I have disabled my camera in the kernel of the operating system, which requires me to restart, and I did not do that in time. So,
well, everyone's assuming that your picture is representative, and I will attest to that fact. It is. So, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, let's before we kick off, and thanks again, Daniela, for inviting us today. I'm quite excited to talk about this subject. I'm not all that experienced in blockchain, but I've been spending some time in this role I have at Thales in this very interesting space. And Avesta, you and I have come to know each other just over the last little while. But our history of companies going back, for me particularly, and this maybe is an opportunity for us to, just give a little introduction of what our backgrounds are. I spent a lot of time with the former DigiCert, the VeriSign days, with my colleagues, some of them that I'm still working with today, back in the mid-90s. And I'm very proud to say that I was one of the very first Luna or Chrysalis employees, which now is owned and operated by the bigger and much bigger Thales. We were 10 people in 1996, and safe to say we're over 80,000 employees now in 2021. So things have changed dramatically, but the fundamentals still apply. In those years that I spent in the cryptographic space and introducing hardware security modules to this entire world, little do we know that these fundamentals still apply, and they continue to affect all of our businesses today. So I'm hoping that today, by the end of this conversation with you, Avesta, we can describe a little bit about how this affects the world of blockchain and how it interoperates with the specific world of Hyperledger. But before I drone on and say over the last, I guess, 30 years, I've been in the crypto and the security space, I'm glad to say that I'm now in the alliances side here at Thales, working with our partners such as DigiCert in its newer format and bigger and better and smarter way. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Avesta, and talk a little bit about what you do with DigiCert.
Absolutely. Again, thanks for having me here. Very exciting times. My name is Avesta. I've been part of DigiCert for the past 5 years. I currently manage the R&D department at DigiCert, which is quite extensive. My team is in charge of doing anything from optimizing consensus protocols, which is quite related to our conversation today, to work on post-quantum crypto, as well as automation when it comes to certificates. I think is worth mentioning what is it that specifically DigiCert does for the audience to understand its relevancy to our conversation today. DigiCert is a public key infrastructure. We provide basically identity for public and private trust. The public trust, many of you have probably dealt with it. If you have gone to a website, you see the lock on top of the browsers, you click on that, you will see X509 certificates, and those are certificates that publicly trusted CAs such as DigiCert are able to issue. The private portion of it mostly focuses on identity for IoT devices, identity for embedded devices, things such as code signing, and it is relevant for us as part of this conversation today to issue certificates on blockchain platforms such as Hyperledger Fabric. A little bit more personal from my perspective. I've been introduced to blockchain since June 2011 when Bitcoin came out. I was finishing my PhD at the time at the University of Illinois, and I started mining. And as Blair and I were speaking about this, the first 3 Bitcoins that I spent were on ordering crackers and pizzas that I wish I never did, and I would have probably bought a house with it now.
If we only knew what investing in cryptocurrencies would be today, and let's not get started and to diverge too much from our conversation today, but certainly a lot of the people on the call today are wondering what is the effect of cryptocurrency as it relates to blockchain. But I'm really impressed with your background, and you and I discussed a lot of other sidebar conversations that happened in less than 10 years. Who would have thought that we'd be at this stage in terms of blockchain? And that's a great segue to our conversation today to talk a little bit about blockchain. I know that most of the people on this phone, if not everybody, on this call today, know what blockchain is, but maybe let's pop into some of the slides, talk a little bit about that, give a little bit of background, and I'm going to make this as conversational as I possibly can. This isn't just an hour with Thales. This is an hour with 2 companies that are invested in Hyperledger, and why do we partner not only within the Hyperledger consortium, but why are we also partners outside of this for the grander good, or whatever that might be. So I have Paige moving the slides for us, so I apologize if, thank you very much. Let's pop to the next slide. Next one, please. And again, Avesta, I'll probably ask you some questions, but let's start from the very beginning and really, what is blockchain? So for those who are, again, brand new to this, and I'm sure there are one or two on the call today, it's an open distributed ledger. It records transactions between 2 parties efficiently in a verifiable and permanent way. It is a very trusted infrastructure, a very trusted manner by which transactions and can occur, but it's across decentralized networks. And using digitally signed transactions, what you described earlier, Avesta, was the use of a protocol called consensus. It is primarily for all of us the fundamental aspect of what we're trying to protect. It's fun to say, hey, it's all protected by crypto, but at the base of that crypto is keys and certificates. So really what you're talking about, and if you click one more time page, you're talking about a blockchain that's made up of not only a database, it's highly distributed, but it's also secured by design. But even blockchain, although it's as cryptographically bound and fundamentally driven by its core with crypto, there are elements within the crypto that are absolutely essential that be protected a certain way. Avesta, I know you have some thoughts on this, but if you wanted to just say that sounds good to me, Blair, if you'd like to throw in a couple comments there, that'd be great.
No, this I think this is great. The only thing that I will add here is majority of people understand blockchain or know blockchain generally by Bitcoin. And I think that's probably the wrong mindset, right? Distributed ledgers historically have existed for many years, but what Bitcoin was able to solve here was that double spending problem. And that's, the hands on consensus protocol, making sure that your consensus protocol has been set right and is able and capable of helping with this secured by design and the distribution that we are seeing today.
So let's go to the next slide. And I'll try and follow along on my slide deck here as well, just to make sure if we lose the connection. So blockchain has been, in some respects, denoted as an emerging technology or something relatively new, and not the entire world isn't resting within or working within the blockchain infrastructure or strata. That's not entirely true. It's sitting behind the scenes in so many industries and being used and incorporated into so much more mainstream applications on a regular basis. So for example, what you're seeing here is that they're certainly emerging, but by no means are they the standard by which organizations, supply chain management, for example, in the case of manufacturing, in the financial markets, the underwriting aspects of that is such that there's been some false starts in that area, but because some of the larger banks are now investing heavily into the blockchain infrastructure, they're underwriting this and they're providing all the fundamentals that you would expect from what typical traditional banking would be. But now they're putting in this aspect of blockchain with these fundamentals we'll talk about today to provide assurance to those that are looking at, sharing information or exchanging actual finances and blockchains themselves or cryptocurrencies themselves. This is where you're starting to see the emergence across a lot of these industries with more confidence. And like everything else, typically when something is built, it takes time for some of the other areas to be shored up with a little bit more security. And we see this in almost every industry, and history will show you that when we started with DigiCert back in the day, they were the only certification authority in the world that actually had its certificates, their root keys, in hardware. The only problem was those hardware devices that they had, they couldn't copy those onto backup hardware devices, and that's where the Thales Luna product came in. That's a little history for you. It wasn't until that point in time that they were backed into a corner that we provided that ability to not only move those keys into those devices, but also back those keys up accordingly across a very large infrastructure. Avesta, I'll let you comment if there's anything in there that you'd like to add.
No, I think personally, this is a great slide. It talks about different use cases that blockchain is able to assist with. And I think one thing is very important to understand is that depending on the use case, and we see those with the bullet points illustrated under each one of these pillars, are going to be different, right? Sometimes we want to make sure that everybody has access to the data. At the same time, we are able to limit the utilization of that data. Often we want to make sure that the identity of the specific individuals who are interacting, either being a data provider or being a data consumer, to some sense has been protected. So again, these are different portions that I think blockchain is able to help with. And the sky is limit, right? There are many different use cases that we have not discovered yet, specifically when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to tracing specific parts and make sure that they are coming from the right supply chain and they have not been modified throughout that process.
So the integrity of the blockchain assures us or provides assurance that it is intact and that it is legit. And I know that there's a lot of backroom buzz that blockchain has, is used for nefarious reasons by state actors and so on. Any thoughts on that, Avesta, in your experience, and how you would respond to that comment?
Absolutely. I think this is an area that we have seen many compromises in the past. Many of us are familiar with the hardware hacks, chipsets being manufactured in a different country, coming over here in the United States and being compromised. And I think this is one area that the traceability portion of blockchain, as well as the auditability, it's going to assist with solving this specific problem. Depending on the platform of blockchain that you have, either being public, private, or a hybrid model, both of them are able to assist with the supply chain traceability use case. But what matters here is to be able to minimize the risk when we are considering a non-OEM device or considering changes in a specific process that previously we have agreed on, but at the end of the day, that process has been compromised again by nation actors or being large supported number of attackers.
So I think that to your point, and this is really where it comes to the actual essence of what us as security providers are doing, is we're taking a proactive approach to this, as opposed to figuring out what's wrong and fixing it when it's broken. That's not an approach that is acceptable in these types of environments. You can't just wing it. In your context of experiencing this over the last 10 years and in your PhD work, I'm sure you saw all sorts of gaps and holes and things that needed to be filled. I think that's where the power of our organizations coming together and looking at these things objectively as you possibly can has demonstrated that this is being taken seriously and this is being adopted. And big Thales, for those of you that don't understand who Thales is as an organization, is an 80,000 person multinational organization, 20 billion euros in business that builds everything from satellites in space to onboard in-flight infotainment systems for the Dreamliners to defense rail systems. Our business, digital identity and security, is very much a part of all of those businesses, and blockchain is being moved into all of our businesses. So we not only provide with our what's called Thales 6 systems integration capabilities, we will actually provide solutions in blockchain. And if you go to our website, you'll find all sorts of examples of that, specific to what you said, Avesta, in the supply chain, especially the manufacturing, and in large banking organizations. Having Thales as part of that gives great comfort that a large organization with this much presence in the world, and no different from DigiCert, that's been putting that little lock in your browser since the beginning of time, these organizations give these companies great comfort. So let's go to the next slide, because I think this is a great opportunity to talk about adoption. Good segue. I'm going to let you talk a little bit to this slide, Avesta. I know we didn't rehearse this. If anybody's wondering, this is just us having a conversation. So if you want to pass it back to me, by all means. But I thought that you, of all people, would have seen the growth in the enterprise adoption. So I'll let you speak to this slide.
Definitely. So again, we have not talked about this slide, so I'm quickly trying to digest this, but I'm going to go ahead and touch on my own personal interaction with blockchain when it started in 2011, in the case here being Bitcoin. And looking back at 2011, when I started personally mining at $27 per block, we never thought that there will be many other use cases that are going to take advantage of the underneath technology. But looking at this TAM that basically is going to grow rapidly from 2017 here to 2021, I think what we are realizing, and you touched on this clearly, Blair, that the concept of security by design to some extent could be achieved by utilizing the blockchain technology. Obviously at DigiCert and from the Thales perspective, we are providing components that is able to assist with this larger scale deployment. But it's very clear that the market that we are looking at and the players that we have here, the Fortune 500 companies from all different segments, logistics, supply chain, and healthcare, are moving from what before was a proof of concept to now being a product that they're able to utilize and essentially achieving a number of things. One is efficiency in the process that they're doing. And that efficiency by itself could be achieved from a number of different elements. Again, the auditability and the traceability that blockchain provides. In addition to that, not only efficiency, they're providing a platform that is extensible, that they're able to add other bells and whistles to it in order for them to expand their infrastructure and make sure that expansion happens not at the cost of security, but happens from security and usability going hand in hand. Again, if I look at this 10 years from now and taking this figure from 2021 to 2031, I can look at it from a perspective of how many other use cases are we able to solve and what would be the target accessible market that those use cases are basically targeting after.
So let me ask you a question, a loaded question. If you had the opportunity to purchase something using Bitcoin, would you do that today?
I already have. It's interesting. Actually, I switch my phone every year for security reasons and obviously for technology perspective. And I was going through some pictures, and in 2018, I was in Japan, and they had a sign that the store receives Bitcoin, and this was a grocery store. So I went online to find this store, and it's a completely Japanese store, so I had to use translation. And I saw from 2018 where they were taking Bitcoin in person, they have moved to take Bitcoin actually on their website. So now they will give you an address if you want to buy anything. You're able to utilize Bitcoin or other type of cryptocurrencies such as Zcash and pay for the item that you are acquiring. I think the function of utilizing Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is not the question here. The question is, what would I achieve by utilizing this type of cryptocurrency? Right? Is the fact that moving my wallet and utilizing my wallet easier than using my credit card number that I'm sure all of us have memorized by now because of how much purchase we do online? Or is it a matter of security because I want to stay anonymous if I buy certain things online? So these are the specific personas that each individual has to ask and answer for themselves and come to the conclusion that using Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies is the right things for them to do.
Right. I appreciate that. I know you have an upcoming vehicle purchase. I won't go into it, but if you want to tell me offline that you purchased that using any of your cryptocurrencies, I want to know.
Sounds like a plan.
So let's go to the next slide, because I think this is also, we're getting to the
Blair, before we go over to I raised my hand, and I encourage others to raise their hand as well and ask any questions that they have. But before we go to the next slide, if you can go back, one of the things, that third bullet item about the move from R&D to production. So we had a very interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago about the fact that, many of these enterprise blockchain projects have been in the R&D and the POC stages for a long time. And really, as you see issues and the questions around security, right, that it comes into when these networks are starting to move into production. So I would love to maybe hear a little bit more, and maybe you have some of these in later slides, some feedback from you and Avesta on that specific. When do you start seeing people saying, hey, security is something that needs to be addressed before we go into production with these networks? Right.
That's a great, and Avesta has a lot more detail, but I'll give you a firsthand account of a number of opportunities that we've been working with over the past 24 months. There's an essential demand to build these applications within the blockchain and the Hyperledger Fabric for obvious reasons. What was missing, it could be as simple as, for example, an AES signing mechanism that's not fully supported by, for example, the HSM at this particular time. They don't, in other words, they don't want to compromise what they could have or have traditionally built in previous platforms, especially in the financial circles. And they do not want to compromise from a regulatory point of view on any of those things. So there's a bit of a catch up. This is our experiences. There's been a bit of a catch up for some of our technologies, not just ours, but others, to all work together. And this is the beauty of integrating with the likes of DigiCert, is that we've been working together for over 25 years. And we have to stay in step to move these into production. So there's been a lot of, like you see here, POCs is of course the death of many, because sometimes they just never get off the ground. But we are seeing at a fairly breakneck pace. As an example, one of the cryptocurrency exchanges being built in Eastern Europe that we're involved with actually started at the very bottom in essence, and saying, we're building foundationally something that we understand from what we did in the, say, large value transaction system, or currency, traditional other currency exchanges. How do we do that from a cryptocurrency exchange point of view? Well, they want to build that completely based on Hyperledger, the fundamentals that Thales brings to the table, and then of course the application companies, the likes of Oracle, IBM, Tata Consulting, the big enterprise players that understand how to build large scale, trusted, government regulated, and regulated within the industry. This is what we're starting to see, is that they're really starting to take hold. Some of them are in production, as you'll see, as I mentioned earlier. You can go to some of our use cases on our website, and I'll let Avesta respond from his perspective.
Yeah, I think you touched on very great points, Blair. Two specific elements that are shining. One is regulations and compliance here, right? Majority of these POCs are being conducted in controlled environments, right? They're not in production. They're not really dealing with, let's say, PII. This is personal identifying information for users. They're not really dealing with financial aspects. So once moving from R&D to production, and that bridge for majority of these use cases, at least for the ones that we have seen in our POCs that we have helped our customers with, have to deal with regulations. The other portion of this is, and I compare this really to PKI, if you look at in 90s, 2000s, and now in 2021, many kept asking, what problem does PKI solve? Today, it's seamless. It's not a problem that it's solved. The lack of not having a proper PKI in place actually becomes a problem. And I will consider the same perhaps is going to apply to blockchain once those developers, researchers, product managers are identifying that there are more problems that blockchain is able to solve for them in comparison to writing the requirements and spending time of bringing this infrastructure up. So in the next few years, and as we have seen in the past year specifically, where we dealt with the pandemic and seeing more people are actually utilizing distributed platforms, that more POCs are going to make their ways into to production environments and bringing their values to the end user.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Avesta. Let's get through the next slides, because I want to really get to the meat in the sandwich, which is the use of PKI and how you and DigiCert provide that capability. So let's go to the next slide, which should pretty much just, let's wrap up the whole aspect of where we are in terms of acceptability and as you described, moving from POC to production. This is what a lot of people live and die by, is the Gartner Hype cycle. Or in the Jeffrey Moore aspect, that trough of disillusionment, if you're familiar with that, where we saw blockchain primarily, if you can see in that tiny font, you'll find it about halfway up the curve. But when you move to, and if you click through to the next bullet for me page, you'll actually start to see that the maturity based on, again, Gartner in 2025, which not too far away from here. And if we click on the final box here, you're starting to see that, you know what, by 2023, $2 trillion worth of goods annually. I think that's well under. And Avesta, I'll leave you to speak to this and tell me your thoughts on the hype curve, or where you see. I know we've covered a little bit in our previous couple minutes, but if you have any thoughts on this, I'd love to hear it.
Absolutely. I mean, this has been one of the biggest drivers for us when it comes to use cases, supply chain. And the reason for that is supply chain is a distributed model as its core. And this is something that, again, a properly designed, developed, and deployed blockchain platform is going to assist with. I mean, if you look at the latest Gartner report that you have here, I think not even by 2023, but if you look at, I usually like to look at it from 5 and 10 years plans. We can look at this market by itself to be so expandable that the lack of having the traceability and auditability that blockchain provides for goods and services, it's going to probably be double the number that we are seeing here. In a case that if you don't have it, you're actually losing revenue and customers, and obviously you're not able to expand your services.
I agree wholeheartedly. And like you said, 10 years in this space, I don't know, maybe it feels like 100 to you, but 30 years in the crypto space, it does feel like 200 years. Let's go to the next slide, which is just to capture again why we're chatting here together. We're longstanding partners of Avesta. When I mentioned, again, my career starting 32 years ago, I think that's a couple years before you were born. The speed of things that have progressed is staggering, yet some of the fundamentals still are still there. Like I said, the beginnings of the VeriSign days and the fundamentals of public key infrastructure, the quiet, silent infrastructure by which all commerce electronically lives and eats and breathes. But you'll see here, as this is related to the case study that we just did with you in Hyperledger Avesta, it talks about the value proposition and the fact that you need to build these things with all those core fundamentals, but at what cost and how much time? And is it really, really difficult to do? Well, it was a lot more difficult to do this in the past. Having crypto people just hanging around was something not any company just had them, hanging around in the hallways. We've had to rely on so many of these people that had that deep crypto expertise. But what you're starting to see now is you're moving this into the cloud. You're digitally transforming everything in your business. And of course, blockchain is no exception. So one of the things that we're seeing as an organization is a lot of our customers have not just completely shifted to the cloud, but they're providing, based on the application use case, the means to get there or the means to use a hybrid approach. So all of those things, again, must have that level of trust and certificate management and assurance. And that's where DigiCert and Thales come together. That you might not think about it, but what keeps people up at night from an IT or from a fundamental crypto or a security or a CISO or anybody in those roles and responsibilities is if any of those things are compromised, the entire blockchain is dead. And that's where we would like to make sure that when you're building these things or thinking about these things from a DevSecOps point of view, that we're making things much easier to embed into your applitions. We're making it much more cloud savvy and cloud easy. So I just wanted to again, that the Hyperledger DigiCert Thales relationship provides the means to do those things. So Avesta, I'll let you clear up what I might have said if I mistakenly said anything that doesn't apply.
No, those were all on point. One thing that I want to mention is, as much as it is important to utilize blockchain for certain use cases, I think the vast majority of focus should be on properly designing this platform. And that's where this alliance between Hyperledger, DigiCert, and Thales is very important. From the perspective of Hyperledger, and I've been around this project for a while, Hyperledger Fabric, being an open source code, has many advantages. Others are able to look at it. I've often looked at the pull request on GitHub, and I see many activities that are pushing this platform, specifically, again, Hyperledger Fabric that I have dealt with, to be not only capable, but be stable for enterprise use cases. From Thales and DigiCert perspective, the same scenario, right? It's if you're not able to secure your public and private keys, if you're not able to have those keys properly managed within compliant HSMs, doesn't really matter if you have a stable blockchain platform or no, you're still at the risk of being compromised. If you don't have a proper management for your certificates, if you're deciding to have each certificate to be issued for specific transactions, make sure that the nodes who are part of this platform are properly validated and vetted, then again, you are at the risk of weakness where the identities are at the risk of being compromised. So overall, if you look at it, this alliance by itself provides all three different factors, from the platform to components to the identity of the individuals who are going to utilize these services.
Excellent. And there's an aspect that I'm sure a lot of people will think about, which is the right to left thinking, which is when we want to deliver this service or this application, if we move back to the left, our starting point is often a lot sooner or a lot earlier than you think. You can't leave things to the last minute. And one of the things that we've experienced, all of us in this industry, is let's build it and they shall come, and then we'll fix those problems later. This is not one of those circumstances where you can do that. All these fundamentals and best practices, all of these things cannot be, have to be legitimately concerned, and they have to be built into your project plan. That being said, a lot of this is encapsulated into standard operating procedures that DigiCert provides, that Thales provides, that Hyperledger, all of us. And that brings me to the next slide here, Paige, if you could move forward. which is talking about, there's a lot of available information specifically with Hyperledger, where it talks about the integration guide itself, or the integration guide talks about how we work with 1.4.6, for example. You might not care about version control, but from an open source point of view, we have to be in step. And the same thing applies to the Oracles, the IBMs, the DigiCerts. We all support the same common source. What we've done here is, this is probably more of a takeaway, but these are things that you can find very easily on our website under the blockchain. Just type, Thales blockchain, and you'll get to all of these things, which is a leave behind after the presentation today. And then the last one, of course, not least, is our most current. If you click one more time page, it'll bring up the Thales and DigiCert case study that we've just completed. And thanks to Avesta's input and Soulcase from our CTO office, I think you'll find this a really good read, really simple, really high level. But I think it's worth a mention that you take a look at this. And again, all of these things are available not only in the Hyperledger website, but you can just Google these with any of the names that you see here if you're just like me, and that's the easiest way to find stuff these days. Let's go to the next slide, and this is where I'm going to hand the baton over to you, Avesta, because this is your core competence. And like I said, I've been in PKI now for 25 years, and a lot's the same, but a lot's changing for the good. So why don't I kick this off? And I'm just looking at our time. We have about 20 minutes left, I believe, Daniela. So if you'll hold us to that, I'm going to probably jump in here as needed. But Avesta, this is for you.
Sounds great. I think generally the way that I try to describe PKI and my audience often will be, I need to be able to describe PKI to my grandma. That's how often she asks, what is PKI and where do you work? And what I describe is you use it without knowing that. And obviously, to be relevant to blockchain, the goal essentially will be the same thing. You're utilizing the platform without knowing what the platform is, or without all the hassles that goes around pushing and implementing the platform. But what is generally PKI? Public key infrastructure by itself is a security standard that allows you to elevate the methods that are being using for authenticating the identity of users, devices, and in cases, organizations. Best example of this is every time that you log into a website from your browser or from your phone, there needs to be a secure socket layer or SSL certificate that shows where this bank has been established and the identity of that bank has been validated. PKI by itself enables verification of the integrity of documents and communications, in this case being code signing as an example. Every time your device receives a new update or your IoT device receives a new firmware update, it is not mandatory, but is preferred to receive that update from a secure source, which often here being the manufacturer. And code signing has that capability. It allows that firmware update to be cryptographically signed. Once your device receives that, if it sees a proper signature, then it will go ahead and deploy that update. Finally, PKI by itself requires a robust platform for digital certificates where you're able to manage the identities. And as part of these robust platform, you need to have what is known as hardware security modules, or HSMs, that provide that anchor of the root of trust. Next slide. So how do customers utilize PKI? And this slide has been quite frankly simplified. That's the fact that there are many, many different use cases that PKI is being used in and is able to help with assisting solving the problems that already exist. But let's start from the top left corner and go around. One specific use case is the managed services that PKI provides for enterprises for authentication. The use case here will be public or private trust. We already talked about public trust being certificates installed on websites. Private trust by itself, it could be internal use cases. It could be servers that they need to be authenticated to internal servers where you don't really want to utilize username and password, where PKI becomes more secure. You can think about fully managed PKI, where customers are able to receive certificates for an application that they have built, or they have Kubernetes and CI/CD pipelines that they want to make sure that every single build receives a certificate on top of the application for the web server that can utilize the certificate in the production environment. Moving on to the next pillar, these are capabilities that PKI provides for distributed environments. Three specific capabilities that PKI provides for distributed ledgers is key sovereignty, data sovereignty, and local resources. And this, in the case of Hyperledger Fabric, becomes quite important. By default, Hyperledger Fabric does get shipped out with Fabric CA, Fabric Certificate Authority. And for some use cases, that might be completely sufficient. For other use cases where you require an enterprise layer of security and management, this is where a managed PKI, such as what DigiCert provides, it's going to be essential, especially because the volume of the signed transactions that you're dealing with are quite high. You would rather have reporting, or you just want to make sure that the overall management is in place. It is also important to understand that HSMs are playing a pretty big role here. This is where we have the 100% integration with Thales HSMs, and we are capable of storing private keys in very specific workflows in these HSMs, given the environment that you have deployed your application in. Government trusted electronic signature workflows are also important. We have seen a very big rise of PKI being utilized specifically in Europe with eIDAS standards. This is where you want to make sure that you also, again, have that key sovereignty, data sovereignty, and local resources that are capable of helping you with document signing. I think we saw an extensive utilization of this given the pandemic, where users are staying at home. They will rather utilize remote notaries, and they would like to receive those electronic signatures with a very high confidence. And finally, there are government programs that require the highest level of security. They require the application here being a managed PKI, for example, or service provider to be located within a specific countries, example again here being Europe. And this is where customers are able to have that customer managed in-country or on-prem deployment of the solution that we have developed in conjunction with Thales. Next slide. What are the key components of PKI? I think it's very important to understand the specific components that are important to have a proper PKI in place. And these are only some of those components. Obviously, there are more, but these are the most important ones. First and foremost is a certificate authority. This is an entity that stores, issues, and signs the digital certificates. DigiCert is a publicly trusted certificate authority, meaning it's able to issue publicly trusted certificates, for example, again, being websites. But also we are able to issue certificates for private trust, where it has less elements of compliance and is being overseen by different governing bodies, but it doesn't require to have all those sophisticated compliance rules being issued by CA Browser Forum or the CAP form. Registration authority, this is where the verification of identity of entities in order to receive a digital certificate is being held. This is again where DigiCert does have a wing that allows for us to validate organizations, anything from LLCs to government organizations to even individuals, to make sure that the entity or individual who has requested a certificate has gone through a proper validation. Central directory, this is a secure location in which we are able to store keys and indexes. In this case, again, HSM will be playing that role. Certificate management systems, this is the PKI processes ensuring that the policies specifically are being enforced to store certificates and allows the delivery of those certificates. And finally, there are certificate policies where are defining the PKI's requirement, considering specific procedures, which allows other auditing bodies to audit the trustworthiness of PKIs. An example of this is every time that you want to create a root certificate, you have to go through a key ceremony. And that key ceremony by itself is a procedure that needs to be properly conducted, but also should allow for auditors to audit the whole process. Next slide, please.
On that one note, just talking a little bit about the root ceremony, just as an aside here, for interest more so, and I know you've got a whole nother slide here to go through. Just to put the context of how important that root key is. For those that recall, there was a time when root keys, specifically with the likes of DigiCert, VeriSign, Entrust, and others, had to protect that at all costs. And just to put in context of how valuable some of those were, Thought Consulting, if you recall back in the day, Avesta sold their company for $500 million for a root key. And Mark Thought actually took some of that money and paid for a two-way ticket, luckily, to space with Russian cosmonauts. But I met him a few years later, and little did he know that having the root of all things and how important that would be worth $500 million over 20 years ago. So that kind of puts you in the sense that why we take this so seriously is that if any of those things are compromised, what the actual value, it's indescribable at this point in time. So I'll let you continue on with your the use cases and finish up here. I think we're doing pretty good for time.
Sounds great. Just one addition to what you mentioned, again, as this is more relevant maybe to blockchain, and I'm just trying to connect this to, I wouldn't call it the real world, but for vast majority of the audience here that might have dealt with this, is the securing your wallet, right? Especially around cryptocurrencies, we have heard this from a number of different perspectives that you want to make sure that you properly do secure your tokens and wallets and your private keys. Now you have to think about this as on a very, very larger scale when you're dealing with not only billions of dollars, but with very sensitive information where the root of trust needs to have that hardware component of it. This is what Thales provides. And obviously the process and procedures and the applications that are able to generate those private keys and properly moving them to HSM, and that's what DigiCert provides. So if you look at it, the scale is completely different. But from the perspective of an enterprise and the partnership that we have with Thales, I would say we have done this so many times that at this point for us it's seamless. But for an outsider, this is a very complex procedure and process that needs to be followed. Back to PKI use cases. There are many, many different use cases that PKI supports, and I'm just going to go through some of these logos here because this provides a little bit more kind of visual for the audience. One is securing devices. If you have a smartphone, if you have IoT devices, even if you have embedded devices, example of embedded devices being vending machines, all of these devices are utilizing PKI and specific certificates. The example for mobile devices are the utilized certificates for the applications that they have installed. Make sure that those applications are being issued from a properly trusted source. This is where code signing comes into play. They also utilize certificates or client certificates for sometimes logging into Wi-Fi networks or having an enterprise environment running on that specific phone. Also, secure emails is another component that PKI is able to assist with. Unfortunately, we haven't seen in the public sector for the publicly trusted, for secure emails to be utilized so much, but in the enterprise level, vast majority of companies are utilizing this, which commonly is known as SMIME certificates, where the sender of an email receives a certificate, and every time they send an email, a certificate will be attached to that email showing that the proper source of that. There are a number of different use cases here. Another one that I will probably have a touch on will be secure documents. This is where you want to make sure that a document, especially let's say a notary document or a document that requires a signature, is being signed by an individual, has not been tampered throughout the signature process and the transmit time. And this is where document signing is extremely important. From our partnership with Thales, DigiCert is able to support on-premises deployment as well as cloud deployment, where we are either able to utilize Thales Luna HSMs on the cloud or on-premises. And both of these are providing corner cases being supported by our solution for many different customers. Next slide, please. DigiCert's PKI solution is specifically and in very short looks at 5 different pillars. One will be the enterprise PKI. Again, this is where we are providing that strong authentication and encryption for data in transit through a unified platform for devices. IoT devices, this is an extremely big market for all of us. And when I say market, I look at it as mostly a problem because many IoT devices out there are insecure, especially now that they're making their ways into our homes, having baby monitors, having sensors that different segments are utilizing. And this is somewhere that we have a very concrete solution in place with the help of Thales. You're able to authenticate, encrypt, and make sure the integrity for all connected devices are being guaranteed. Blockchain is another area that we heavily discuss about today. This is where we have an integration to Hyperledger Fabric. We provide the management layer where Thales does provide the support for securing the private keys. We talked about document signing, and finally the TLS and SSL. where we provide global certificate control, visibility, and solution scalability for interrupted businesses such as financial sector, logging into your Facebook, Instagram, social media, whatever that sector might be that requires the organization who can afford downtime. Next slide. Back to you, Blair.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Avesta. I know we've got a few minutes left here for some questions, and I see some in the chat. Daniela, I can let you tee this up as we wrap up what I hope was an informative session. I've certainly enjoyed my time with Avesta. I know we're going to spend more time talking about ourselves after the call, but for those who are looking at something that they need to consider, this is something I hope is within your purview. So go ahead, Daniela.
Wonderful. And it's just so great to see, these types of partnerships in the market within the Hyperledger community. As Avesta said, DigiCert has been a member of Hyperledger and a contributor since the start. Was it Avesta 2015, 2016, right when the project started?
Right.
And it's just fantastic to see as these markets develop, and as in the case of what we were discussing today, Hyperledger Fabric is being used in these production networks, that it is creating a lot of these partnering and business opportunities for those of you in the community. So I know there's a couple questions. I just want to remind everyone on the line, if you want to submit a question, you can raise your hand and I'll go ahead and promote you to voice, or you can add it in chat or the Q&A. Blair, I see a question specific from Badar Beja, who is the CTO of mChain from Morocco. He apologizes for not being able to ask the question via audio because he has mic issues. Do Thales and DigiCert provide any self-sovereign identity or decentralized PKI solutions or ongoing projects?
I'm going to let Avesta take a kick at that one first, because I know that there's an aspect of, I'm just going to let Avesta respond first.
Definitely. I think self-sovereign identity by itself will be an interesting topic, especially since, this is part of Hyperledger. Hyperledger In-depth, for example, by itself has been quite an interesting project. And I think that's where self-sovereign identity plays a big role. There are a number of different providers out there. But specifically from our perspective, self-sovereign identity is something that requires some of those corner cases when it comes to regulations and compliance to be solved before we'll be able to actually expand on that. In addition to that, I think the second part of the question is decentralized PKI solutions. We certainly do have a project that we are discovering more capabilities of decentralized PKI and the use cases that is able to solve. I think it's very important to understand that if something works today and it works with the highest level of security, what would be a requirement for developing something on top of that where there are many unknowns, right? And this comes down to the decentralized PKI. If you look at it, managing keys, managing the applications from the PKI perspective has been around for the past 20 years. And continuously, with the help of Thales, we're trying to evolve this process, but also looking at something such as decentralized PKI is definitely going to be on our roadmap, which again, it is today, but is mostly as part of our R&D than being a product.
And I think that speaks to the cloud offering that DigiCert One and others are building, the PKI as a service and so on is right, I assume, Vesta.
That is correct.
Yes. So take a look at our website, and I take a knee on that one because Avesta has a much better, broader respect to that. But in terms of federated PKI and other aspects of that, we're certainly seeing the PKI things on the identity side emerging and growing at an unbelievable pace and rate. From lifecycle management of IoT devices, where do those certificates reside, where do those keys reside, all those things are elemental to decentralized PKI as I understand it. And I might be way off topic, I hope not, Avesta, but I'm a generalist at best in this particular area. Is there any other questions, Daniela, that we need to answer, or are we almost?
Yeah, I don't see any questions. So if people do have additional questions or would like to get in touch with both of you, how would they go about doing that?
So we have, I don't know if we've put that in the chat or on any of the slides, but forgive me, I'll ask Paige to type in our email addresses in the chat there. As again, I'm responsible for the alliances. I'm one of many that respectfully manages over 400 of our alliances, of which DigiCert is one of our key partners. And I know that sounds a little trite. It's actually effectively one of our key partners. for over 20 years. And we're building our business with them. And I manage with my colleagues that relationship. So you can always reach out to me. We have a field organization that scatters the globe. We operate in almost every country, not like a DigiCert. We're a little bit bigger, but in terms of our scope, we're well in the same bucket. So please just send us an email and we'll respond accordingly. We'll generally get back to you within 24 hours.
Wonderful. So once again, Avesta, Blair, thank you for all your contributions that you've done to the Hyperledger community, for sharing some of this work today. And I encourage everyone to reach out to both of them and their organizations to learn more and get engaged as well. So thank you again. As I started off with, this is our bi-monthly, and sometimes this month we actually have 4 different sessions with our Hyperledger members, in-depth sessions. The next one will be on September 22nd with Mindtree, where we will be discussing many of their use cases using Hyperledger technologies in the marketplace. The one after will be on September 28th, which is going to be a Hyperledger project focused one on Hyperledger Besu, where Palm NFT Studio is going to be speaking about the Palm sidechain. This is Palm NFT is actually the organization behind the recent Damien Hirst currency art project and its NFT project, as well as Space Jam, and that utilizes Hyperledger Besu. So we're very excited about that session. But please do visit hyperledgerevents.org for additional information. We have a lot of great content, including the content from our summer global forum, where there were hundreds of sessions and production use cases that were shared with the community. So I encourage you to view those on demand as you see fit. We are an open source community, so please get involved, join our Hyperledger projects, our working groups, and our special interest groups based on your interest and where you would like to see participation and contribution to the project. So once again, thank you very much to Thales and DigiCert for today's session. Thank you all for watching and participating, and we look forward to seeing you in the next event, as well as in our community. So for that, thank you all. Have a great day.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. We'll go ahead and stop the recording.
Have we got Paige there?